Nothing says summer like tomatoes, and with warmer days upon us, it's time to get them planted. Hi, I'm Ben. Join me as I get this lot planted, discuss the best supports to use for tomatoes, and I will be revealing what these are for. Tomatoes like the warm, so before planting tomatoes, we need to acclimatise them to the great outdoors over the period of about a week. Just pot them somewhere sheltered and maybe bring them indoors for the first few nights and watch out for chilly nights. You can leave them outside for increasingly longer spells as planting time approaches. Now, a cold frame like this makes an excellent halfway house, and you can prop the lid open increasingly wide as the days roll on. Not everyone has the time, space or inclination to grow their own tomatoes from seed, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Most nurseries and garden centres offer a really solid selection. Just inspect the plants before buying. We're looking for lovely, strong and crucially green plants without any discoloration and that aren't too drawn and leggy. These guys here, for example, look just perfect. Tomato plants really do love that sunshine and warmth. It helps them grow to their fullest potential, and of course it's what develops the tomato's fullest flavour and aroma. There's nothing like cupping a just picked tomato, still warm from the afternoon sunshine, and breathing in its heady aroma, pure ambrosia. So be sure to pick the sunniest spot in your garden, one that gets an absolute minimum of 6 hours of direct sunshine a day, but preferably much more than that. 8, 10, 12, the sunnier the better. This here is a really sunny spot. It gets good afternoon sunshine right through to the evening, so I'm confident my plants will really love it here. Like most vegetables, tomatoes love a Goldilocks soil that's moisture retentive but also quite well drained, and of course rich in nutrients. The best way to achieve that, of course, is to add well-rotted organic matter in the weeks and months before planting. I've added some really well-rotted manure onto this bed here several weeks ago, and it's had enough time to break down a bit and for the worms to start incorporating it into the soil for me. We're all set to go, so let's get this lot planted. Now, of course, like anyone, I want the very best from my tomatoes, and that means ensuring there's enough space for them to grow and, of course, enough light. I'm planting here indeterminate tomatoes, also known as vining or cordon tomatoes. These guys need at least 18 inches or 45 centimetres between plants, and then about 2 foot or 60 centimetres between rows. Now, this will ensure they not only get enough light, but also a good enough airflow, and that's really important for reducing potential problems with diseases. Tomatoes are incredible plants because they can produce roots at any point along their stem. So with this in mind, we can dig planting holes quite a bit deeper than we might for other vegetables to encourage roots to be produced lower down on the stem. More roots on our tomato plant will help to really anchor it into position, and of course it means it can draw on more moisture and more nutrients to support all of that growth. So dig your planting holes a little bit deeper than the root ball to allow for that. If you're planting into a grow bag like this, you can create that same effect of the roots coming out of the stem to anchor it in by just planting your tomatoes into the top of the bag as usual, but then popping over a bottomless pot on top and then filling that part of the way with fresh potting mix so that part of the stem is buried. That way you get the same effect, and there's now a bit of space here so that you can come in and water, and it'll hold on to the water like a reservoir, allowing it to properly drain through to the roots below. So now for those fish heads. Now, I'd heard about fish heads being put into the bottom of planting holes before, and if I'm honest, I've always rather scoffed at the idea. But on doing a little more research, it turns out it's not such a bad idea after all. Of course, the fish is going to be full of nutrients, and as it breaks down, the tomato's roots can grow down into it and tap into that. Apparently, the Native Americans have been including fish with their three sisters of corn, squash and beans for thousands of years. Whether or not that's true or not, if you think about it, we're often advised to put in fish emulsion or a fish-based liquid feed, so this kind of makes sense. So I've got fish heads here and just trimmings too. It doesn't really matter, they've all got the similar amount of nutrients. So in goes a fish head or bit of fish into each planting hole like that. Bit grim. And then I'm just going to cover them over with a little bit of soil. That will help to both mask the smell from marauding cats and foxes and of course Rosie, and it will help to serve as a bit of a buffer between the roots of the tomatoes and the fish until it does start to break down a bit. Whew, that's ripe. And now in with the tomatoes. We don't want to bury any of the leaves when we bury the stems, so just pick off the lowest leaves that are likely to be buried, and then in it goes and backfill with our excavated soil. And then to finish, I'm just going to water everything in with a weak liquid seaweed solution, just to give plants a bit of a boost and to help them to settle in. Once the plants start flowering, I will just go in with the occasional liquid feed, either of a tomato feed or a homemade liquid feed. And we will be looking at how to make a homemade liquid feed in a future video. So make sure you have subscribed and turned on notifications so you don't miss that one or indeed any of our upcoming videos. Most tomatoes appreciate some form of support, so the plants are kept up off the ground and the tomatoes aren't on the soil, which might cause them to rot or get nibbled at by the likes of slugs. How you support your tomatoes depends on what type you have. Determinate or bush tomatoes tend to grow not much taller than around waist height, so for them we can get away with little more than a sturdy stake or perhaps a tomato cage, and more on that shortly. For our indeterminate or vining or cordon tomatoes, well, these guys can grow up to head height, even taller, so for them we will need something a little more substantial. Like most gardeners, I can't resist adding to my collection of gardening tools and accessories from time to time, and I've invested in these tomato towers here. Now the idea of them is very simple. We just plonk them straight over your plant like that, get them in the ground nice and firm, and then as the plant grows up, the foliage is all hemmed in within the walls of this, so it doesn't go onto the ground. Nice and straightforward. Now, with these indeterminate tomatoes, I will need to be removing excess foliage, pruning off the side shoots that emerge coming out from the main stem. And that's important because that concentrates all of the plant's energy into flower and fruit production, which is important. If you're in a hotter climate though, and you've got great growing weather, you may not have to do all that pruning. Plants will grow vigorously enough with the warmer weather, but in my decidedly cool and damp climate, removing the side shoots is an absolute must. You don't have to splash the cash on tomato towers, of course. Good old-fashioned bamboo canes or stakes will do just fine. Just firm them right down into the soil so they're nice and firm and rigid, and then you're good to go, and tie them in obviously as the tomato plant grows. Try not to stab the young roots of the plants. Maybe you could just put them in before you actually plant, and that would avoid stabbing the roots. Down here I've planted my determinate or bush tomatoes, and they've had the same fish head and plant deep treatment as the indeterminate tomatoes up there. Now they're called determinates just because they grow to a predetermined height and won't grow any taller, unlike the ever skyward cordon tomatoes up there. The easiest way to support determinate tomatoes is with either a sturdy cane or a stake driven into the ground, and then you just tie it to the stake as the plant grows. An alternative is to use what's called a tomato cage, which is a sort of dumpier, squatter and wider version of the tomato towers I've used up there. Now bush tomatoes don't need any pruning, they just grow up and grow left, right and centre, and you can just leave them be. And they will also tend to produce their fruits over a much shorter time frame, which makes tomato cages absolutely perfect for them. Now you can buy them off the shelf, but they are a bit pricey, so an alternative is to make your own. The easiest way to make a tomato cage is to use a sheet of concrete reinforcing mesh or remesh. I couldn't find any of that, but I have this cattle fencing here which comes on a roll, and it just happens to be the right height for a tomato cage. So it's simply a question of rolling out what we need to give the appropriate diameter, and I'm going to aim for a diameter of around 18 inches or 45 centimetres to properly hold the tomato plant in. If you've got a more vigorous variety, you might want a diameter of say 2 foot or 60 centimetres or even a little bit bigger. And now with it cut, we're just going to secure the ends. You could use zip ties or cable ties for this, but actually just using the cut end of the wire and folding it back on itself does a great job of that in itself. Sometimes you might need to just sort of flex or roll the wire to get a sort of more perfectly round shape. I think that's good to go. So to help the plant along, I've driven in a stake next to it, which I'll tie it to as it grows, just as it starts off at least. And now I can go in with the tomato cage, which I'm simply going to helicopter over the top like that and make sure the plant is as central as we can get it. And then to stop the cage being disturbed or flying away or whatever, I'm going to just pincer it in with some stakes either side like this. I can either weave it in or we can just tie it in, but let's try weaving it through and then just push that in, and then one this side as well. My tomatoes are planted, I've watered them in, and certainly the rain has, and I could just leave it at that. But what better way to finish off our totally terrific toms than with a supporting act of companion flowers. These here are some marigolds that I've grown with seed, and I have to say I'm really very pleased with them. Once they're planted and grown up a bit, they won't just add a welcome splash of colour as they grow beneath the tomatoes here, they will also help to deter whitefly, and I'll be planting them with some tomatoes in the greenhouse too for that very reason. Now they'll start flowering in a couple of weeks, and when they do, they'll add that beautiful colour, the lovely scent which I especially love, and they'll of course also attract pollinating insects too. Now, another companion plant you can grow with tomatoes is dill. It's a beautiful herb and the flowers are just stunning. And if you have ever seen it in flower, you will know just how much beneficial bugs like hoverflies absolutely adore it. So it's always worth including some of that. So I'm just sprinkling some seed here at the end of the row of tomatoes, and we'll just tickle it in like that. If you're wondering what makes a good companion plant to any vegetable, then you might want to use our garden planner, which will show you ideal bedfellows for any selected crop. And finally, a sowing of basil, because basil and tomatoes go perfectly together after all. I'm actually going to sow 5 different types here, including this lovely citrusy lemon basil, a purple-leaved basil, and a really tiny-leaved Greek basil. Can't wait to try them all out. To be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure I've got the room for all of these, but I'm going to jolly well make sure I find some space. Some of them will be planted in and around my tomatoes so that I can pick some basil leaves at the same time I pick some tomato fruits, but others will just have to be dotted here, there and everywhere as space allows. Now I'm hoping to do a video on this, contrasting and comparing all these lovely basils, and that will be either later this season or early next spring, so just make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss that one either. There is so much more tomato growing advice I would like to share with you, and thankfully there's plenty of that in this playlist, including how to get your tomatoes to flower sooner and how to dodge common problems. I'll catch you next time.